Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Dan and I'm here to bring you another FPL video. In this one, it's my sharing of my first draft with you all, just to talk essentially about all the different selections I've made so far in my team and the reasons why. We'll also be looking at on the back end of the video, some open questions I've got not only for this draft, but also some general community ones I think we need to ask by game week 1. So if you enjoy the content, guys, please do remember to leave a thumbs up on it. Really helps the channel tremendously. So let's have a look at the goalkeeping options first of all, and we'll also talk about the format of the video. So formation will be revealed as time goes on once we reveal more of the team, and the team cost as well will of course accrue accumulatively as we reveal more and more players. So at the moment we've got two goalkeepers costing us £8.5 million. Now, to basically start off with, let's talk about that as a cost. I don't want to spend any more than this, to be honest. I've never done it in any season previous, and I really don't want to start doing it now. I mean, I was let down massively by Edison on the back end of the last season, which is kind of almost justification in itself to not spend too much money in the goalkeeping position. But also as well, it just gives us the amount of, when we've only got 100 million to spend before we've started to build up team value, it's really easy to get lost and not put the right amount of money, in my opinion, into the starting 10 outfield players. And putting more money in the goalkeeper than that's needed. Their ceilings for points are really low. You know, other than penalty saves and bonus points and stuff, the reality is their ceiling is usually 6-7 points, right, on average. So it's really not worth, in my opinion, spending the extra 0.5 just to continuously get 6 or 7 points when the potential is maybe a lot higher to put that 0.5 million into another attacker, for example. So that's where my head's at with it. Hopefully that makes sense and you agree. If not, though, please let me know in the comments below. In terms of the individuals, Areola to start with looks like he's the emerging 4 million goalkeeper for West Ham. If he does get his place locked in ahead of Fabianski, then definitely this looks like a good rotation pairing. We'll go into that in a bit more detail shortly, and you'll see how I would line up with this pairing, essentially, for each game week. And we can see that it works quite nicely. And I think really that is the caveat to owning Leno. I think I can only really own him and justify him if Areola becomes the starting goalkeeper. Because in the weeks where Fulham's fixtures are really tough, in that opening 5, West Ham's are arguably a lot easier and a lot more comforting to play that goalkeeper in. So I don't think Leno's an option if you don't have Areola as a starting keeper. Let's get that out of the way first of all. But if he is, then I genuinely think he's someone we need to consider. And here's the reasons why. He made the second most saves in the season last season, with registering 144, only 10 less than David Raya, who of course was the highest scoring goalkeeper in terms of points. That being said, Raya is now 5 million because of that reason. He is no longer a 4.5 million option, and Flecken is potentially a replacement for him anyway. That being said, Flecken is unproven. We don't know if he's as prolific of a shot stopper, where we do actually have data to back up both Leno and, surprisingly, Jordan Pickford as possible 4.5 options. Now, because we've got Leno in the team, we'll primarily focus on Fulham. Fulham were the third worst team in terms of shots conceded on target last season. Bournemouth and Brentford were the first two, so it's no surprise that David Raya made as many saves as he did and registered as many points as he did, because Brentford ultimately conceded a lot of shots on target. Fulham being the third worst, also then it's no surprise that Leno makes the second most amount of saves. The thing is now, though, he is £4.5 million, whereas Raya is not. And then, funnily enough, the fourth slot down is Everton in terms of shots conceded on target. And of course, Jordan Pickford is also priced at £4.5 million and also made 120 plus saves last season. So I think Leno and Pickford seem to be the way to go. And I genuinely think that save points are a point mechanism that's overlooked quite often when we select our goalkeepers, because we think about clean sheets with defenders. We don't necessarily think about goalkeepers' bonus point system in terms of how it works. The saves are imperative to that. Saving a penalty 9 times out of 10, even if the goalkeeper has already conceded 2 goals, will still offer maybe 2 or 1 bonus points for them. It's something that you must consider. So I think if Leno is racking up as many saves as David Raya was, then there is absolutely every argument that we could slot him in. It's the same for Jordan Pickford as well. So not locked in, But again, I just wanted to kind of elaborate a little bit more on that 4.5 million slot, as I think there's a lot of people jumping to the 5 million goalkeepers, maybe a bit too hastily without really taking into consideration the point ceiling of what you can achieve with a 4.5 million keeper. So with that out of the way, let's look at the fixtures and the rotation between the two of them, between game weeks 1 and 9. Now, first of all, let's just talk about why I've selected the game weeks 1 to 9. It's just because I've kind of taken almost like an average pool of where I think the wild card would be activated, in which case we don't need to necessarily look at this pairing anymore, because we're probably going to reset to a more favourable pairing for a longer term, right? So I thought, let's just look at the first 9 game weeks. Maybe we're in a fortunate enough position where we look even further than that for a wild card. But if not, let's just look at it as a possibility. And as you can see, there's a plethora of green options in terms of fixtures. And this screen here is where essentially I'll be playing each goalkeeper. Game weeks 2 and 3 are by far the trickiest, which you'll see, Brentford at home and Chelsea away in game week 2 is really difficult to decide between. And then Arsenal away and Brighton away in game week 3 is really not that great. So maybe the rotation here is weaker on the early portion of the season. You might have to concede the fact you might be 6-7 points behind the average goalkeeper scoring across the 3 weeks. But then from game week 4 onwards, you've got nothing but a sea of green, to be honest. Aston Villa in game week 9 away, maybe you could argue that's a grey fixture. They're a little bit more prolific this time round under Emery, so absolutely you could say that's a more difficult fixture. But ultimately, it's still, we've got about 4 or 5 good solid game weeks of rotation here that I really like. So let's caveat it once again with the fact that Areola must be ahead of Fabianski if I was to go with this pairing, and maybe yourselves, but it does look strong, right? So let me know what your thoughts are below, but that's the justification for them. Let's go into the defence next up. It really is pretty template though, guys. I'm not going to lie here. It's really standard. Trent, Gabriel, Estepinian, Henry and Bell. So in terms of price points, we've obviously got the 8 million of Trent, 2 5 millions, a 4.5 and a 4. So let's start with the bench options. Henry is a 4.5 million option. Could be Botman, could be Mings, although one of the viewers did correctly point out that Aston Villa are linked with Pau Torres, which means there could be rotation for Mings. Henry and Botman probably locked in, I would say, in terms of defensive positions for their teams respectively, but just Brentford, I think, edge it in terms of those early fixtures. So yes, Botman probably will provide tremendous amount of value again over the course of the season, but I like Brentford's fixtures more early on, so maybe Henry is the pick. In terms of Bell, it's a 4 million player. You could put Baldock in there, maybe one of the Burnley defenders as well, but I really don't think it's worth thinking too much about. And then, of course, Trent, Gabriel, Estepinian. The starting 3 here. Trent and Estepinian I've seen in a tremendous amount of drafts, so I really do think that a lot of people will end up going with them, and I do think rightly so. I mean, Estepinian's first 3 fixtures are phenomenal. £5 million as well. Absolutely fantastic value. Trent at 8 million is the problem because he's such a high price, but that Bournemouth game week 2 fixture just looks incredible to target, and I do think it's going to be hard to get to him if you don't start with him. So that's the reason why I've got him in the team at the moment. And of course then Gabriel is the 5 million option, or the second 5 million option. Could also be Zinchenko. I mean, there's of course Pedro Porro, Alex Moreno around that price point that I've mentioned that I do like as possible options later on as well, so quite easy to move to them. But overall, this is a £35 million spend so far. So yes, you could say Trent, the money could be spread and could be spent elsewhere. It's definitely a question that's hot topic, but we're not locked in yet, guys. So let's move into the midfield. We've got a 4-man midfield, so I can reveal this formation for this draft is a 3-4-3. And I've labelled it as a 1.5 premium draft just because Son at that 9 million mark, I think is going to be a little bit difficult to achieve for most people if you don't start with him, similar to Trent. Just because, yes, there are 7.5 million options, there's 8 and 8.5 million midfielder options, but that 9 million slot I feel is very, very bespoke for a couple of individuals. And Son looks like a really strong differential. It's just those early 2 fixtures. Is it too soon to go with him in game week 1? And we just have to find a plan and a route to get to him in game week 3. I mean, you could argue you're rolling your transfers in the first few weeks. And of course, then game week 3, you'll have 2 transfers to burn. So quite easy to maybe get to him in 2 moves. That being said, though, I still think that under the new management, we're going to see a lot better results from him this season. Definitely one to watch. Not locked in by any stretch, but I definitely like him as a pick. Then we'll talk about Bruno Fernandes. I think there are talking points to be had here with him. We've got a bit of a kind of pros and cons table maybe starting to formulate. And I think we'll start off with the cons, because ultimately he was number 1 for the chances created and top chances created, or big chances created, in the season last season. The problem is with United is we don't have a prolific number 9 to finish those chances other than Marcus Rashford. So if he's not playing in the number 9 role, or the ball doesn't seem to find Rashford's feet, then potentially we lose out on that potential assist threat that Fernandes poses. So that's a huge con in itself. We need to see and keep an eye on the transfer market before we lock him in. You have got the option as well here that Mount potentially is the more progressive midfielder, and Fernandes sits in a little bit deeper alongside Casemiro. Of course, they talk the same language, so you'd expect maybe there's a bit more clearer communication that Bruno can translate to Mount kind of, in play to some degree, right? Casemiro is learning English, of course, but maybe can't communicate directly to Mount. There is that to consider in terms of chemistry. You've also then got a possibility, I suppose, of Mount just having, I think there was a statistic on Sky Sports shared that he's number 1 for Chelsea across his career of, progressive passes forward, assists, like all of the really good attacking numbers that Erik ten Hag is looking for. So maybe that does happen, and Fernandes' assist threat really does drop off. The pros, though, are that if we do sign a striker, again, the chances created for him are so prolific that essentially all you need is somebody on the end of it. And 9 times out of 10, he's going to get an FPL point registered because there is someone finishing his chance off. Not only to mention that, he's got his penalties as well to consider. And it's just part of a Manchester United attack that I think is ever improving. So there are pluses, there are cons. I really do think he's not locked in by any stretch for me. He could easily become Rashford at some point. But let me know what your thoughts are on him. There's definitely a debate to be had still. With Saka next up, I don't really think any introduction is needed on this man, other than that what a player he is. He's $1 million cheaper than he should be, in my opinion, in terms of FPL. So at $8.5 million, he's an absolute steal. He's part of a very, very strong attacking side of Arsenal. And those 3 fixtures just look amazing. I mean, is there any more justification needed there? It's just such a strong pick, I think, that it's just a number 1 locked-in pick for me. Then we move on to Mitoma at $6.5 million. It is a price point that I want covering. We have got a couple of other Brighton assets that we can look at. We can look at Pascal Gross, for example. We can also look at Solly March. They are absolute options that you can pick as differentials. That being said, there's also Eze, there's Mbeumo. There are plenty of players in that area that we can cover with this price point. It's just that Brighton's opening attacking fixtures just looks so promising once again that I think I want a piece of it in one way or another. And Mitoma does fit that bill for me at this moment. So could be overrated for some, but I really like him as a pick. And then finally, we've got the $4.5 million slot on the bench. As you can see, blacked out, as I haven't really picked anybody to fill that slot that I feel comfortable enough that may get some kind of appearances or minutes, right? So moving into the front 3, finally then, we do have Wissa, Haaland and Jesus. Now, Wissa may be a bit of a surprise to some of you, but we'll have a look at that in a bit more detail shortly. We've got Jesus up first with, again, 3 great fixtures, part of that Arsenal attack that's so prolific. Why do we not go for him? I think there is argument you could go for a double up in Arsenal's midfield rather than Jesus, as sometimes his finishing really isn't there. You could put maybe Darwin Núñez in there, Gakpo, for example, take a punt on Nkunku. You've also got Ollie Watkins as well at that price point. So lots of options that we can go with still. But I think a double up on Arsenal attack is nearly almost essential for that run of fixtures. It's S tier, great format for them. I just think, yeah, it's got to be done. Then we look at Erling Haaland at 14 million. It's unbelievably expensive, but at the end of the day, he is what he is. He's an absolute machine, FPL points magnet. Can't see myself going without him. So I think he is the second locked-in individual for this draft. And then finally, last but not least, Wissa. I mean, as a differential, I really do I've started to rate him more and more. The more and more I've looked into the data behind the scenes of what Brentford are doing without Ivan Toney, the more and more I've realised that Wissa is that essential kind of fall-in for the number 9 position. It isn't Mbeumo. Mbeumo only seems to play in a partnership with Wissa when Brentford play 5 at the back. And in their opening fixtures, they are playing Tottenham, which, yes, you could argue they may play 5 at the back, which means Mbeumo will probably play up top with Wissa. But beyond that, in the easier fixtures, let's say, it's normally 3 up top where Mbeumo's pushed out slightly to the left. Doesn't mean that his attacking output is any less, but actually it's a lot closer than I thought. When you look at the statistics and the data, their returns are very, very similar. So I do like Wissa as a differential option. And also it's worth noting, with Mitoma and Wissa, they could very, very easily become Ferguson and Mbeumo. There's same teams, but just different personnel covering 2 different attacking roles. So that's also a consideration for this draft. But that is the draft, guys. Let me know in the comments below what you think of it. I mean, I think this is one of the strongest I've put together so far in terms of flexibility. There are some options that we've got, though, and we'll be talking about that in the next section. And this is kind of the open thoughts and question marks that I've still got for this draft. So first up, we've got the Manchester City midfielders. Big question mark on who we go with. Foden, Grealish, Mahrez, all fantastic FPL options, but who gets the most minutes? Who looks like they're nailed? It is a question mark that maybe we're always going to be asking and not something that we get information on. But for now, it is something I'm considering. With Trent Alexander-Arnold next up, essential or can the funds be spread? The simple answer is yes, the funds can be spread, but how do you then get back to Trent? And I think the simple answer on that is only realistically by wildcarding, or at least having 2 or 3 moves in the bank essentially to use. So very, very difficult to navigate back to him, especially with price rises as well. Maybe he is essential for just that game week 2 fixture. If you go without him, then absolute hats off to you if you've predicted that he's going to score a couple of 1-2 pointers. But if he pops off and he is in that progressive midfielder role, it's going to be really, really hard, I think, to get to him. So I'm still on the fence with it. Didn't answer that question very clearly. Sorry, really politician answer. But it's just the reality. We still don't know yet. Fernandes to Rashford, Son to Maddison. A move that I'm looking at as a potential way to free up at least $1 million in the bank. Son to Maddison could be argued that it's just Son to a 7.5 million midfielder in one of the City guys or just somebody else. It doesn't have to be Maddison. That was purely just for kind of, I want to cover maybe a Spurs attacker. Fernandes to Rashford is also based on the pros and cons we spoke about earlier. Does it just make more sense to go for a midfielder that sometimes plays a number 9 role and was just so fantastic in terms of his goal scoring threat last season that maybe he's just the better United option overall now? Then we have a look at Mitoma to Mbeumo, Wissa to Ferguson. Already spoken about it briefly in the previous section, but it is basically just a switch up of personnel for the same amount of money to cover both Brentford and Brighton attack. So something that I think is important and something I want to look at in a bit more detail as time goes on. And of course, with the 1 million in the bank of the previous moves suggested, what that allows me to do is maybe look at covering the 5.5 million defensive price point. Definitely one of the weaknesses of this draft is that it's a difficult price point to reach because I have 2 5 million defenders, 8 million in Trent, which is such a massive jump. And then of course only a 4 and a 4.5 million on the bench. No money in the bank to be able to upgrade unless I free up the money in that way on the graphic on screen. So I could then maybe move a Rico Henry to Reece James, Ben Chilwell, maybe Luke Shaw, someone like that, and get that price point covered. Not an easy thing to do, though, without at least 2 moves if I do continue with the draft as is. So something to consider. Finally, the 4.5 million goalkeeper, guys. We've already spoken about it in depth at the beginning, but the big question mark for me is, could Flecken replicate Raya? The save points are absolutely crucial to Raya's success last season, and if Flecken is not as good of a shot stopper, then how sure can we really be that he's going to replicate the total points tally or, be as prolific as David Raya was? At 4.5 million does look like a bargain at first glance, but actually is there better options in Leno and Pickford? Something I still need to evaluate a bit more on, but hopefully you guys found some value in what I discussed earlier. So that's going to wrap up the video, guys. Hopefully you really enjoyed it. It's the first proper draft I think I've shared with you guys. I did do some templates previously, and you could consider maybe those initial drafts, but I think this is the first serious one I've really put together. So hopefully you found some value in it and use it to your advantage. Of course, there are going to be more videos coming soon, so please feel free to subscribe to be notified of those. Smash a like on the video below if you did enjoy the content, guys. And of course, thanks again for watching and supporting the channel. See you guys in another video very, very soon. Take care.